Hello, I'm attorney Tammy Saltzman, and you are watching Divorce Connection Network. Today, I am so pleased to introduce all of you to family law attorney Louis Shafer. Hi, Louis.
Good morning. How are you?
Good. We have one of my favorite topics, and something that Lou is very passionate about, and it's parenting. And parenting is probably the number one thing that, if you don't get right, could really screw up your family. And in court, most definitely, the judges think that whatever is in the best interest of the children is the priority. Is that correct?
That is correct. And that's going to be the benchmark throughout the case from the inception to the end.
Right. You once heard a judge say, why don't you tell the audience?
A very important case was taking place, and a judge said to the other litigant, not my client, that apparently you hate your husband more than you love your children. And that really resonates in the cases that I handle, even when I'm representing the better parent or the not better parent, in terms of educating both parents on how to take the high road and focus on the best interest of the children and take the emotional aspect out of the process with the children and the parenting issues away from the anger of the other party.
Right. The most important thing that a child needs in life is a sense of security. And when parents are battling, they don't feel secure. And when a parent is bad-mouthing the other parent, you're bad-mouthing half of your child, because children are made up of half and half of each spouse. So it's really important. Now, in an ideal situation, husband and wife get divorced and they get along.
That unfortunately seems to be rare, but with more education and more attorneys taking the position that you and I take, I'm seeing that more and more in my cases. However, it's the 1 out of 10 case or 2 out of 10 cases where it becomes very explosive and like a volcano, and you cannot stop the lava from coming out of the volcano, and it's very, very difficult. And just to comment, with regard to the children wanting security, they really don't want to hear about the litigation. They don't want to go from mom's house to dad's house or dad's house to mom's house and go and sit down and have dinner and hearing about what letter the other lawyer sent today or what motion came the other day and sharing that information. They really want to be isolated, and they don't want to take sides. They want to be loved equally.
I once said to a client, she came in and she goes, my daughter hates my ex-husband and they have no relationship and she doesn't want to have anything to do with him. And I said, that's really unhealthy, because that's how she's going to feel about most men in her life. And she's like, well, what am I supposed to do about that? And I said, well, as soon as you forgive, she'll forgive. And it's as easy as that.
It is, and children are very resilient, and they follow by the example that's given to them. And if they're getting a good example and a healthy example, they will definitely follow that, and that divorce process with regards to children's issues will go much more smoothly, quickly, and will become a non-issue when you eventually get to a mediation, which happens once or twice before a trial, or before you get to a temporary relief hearing for temporary timeshare, because if you take those things out of the equation, most people can agree to the timeshare.
I love what Louis is saying. It's really important to understand that however your child observes what's going on is what he's going to bring into his life. And if you set a good example, then you will be a good example. And I don't know if you know this, but my parents were divorced when I was 9.
I didn't know that.
And my mom and dad got along. They invited each other to events. They did not fight in front of us. They did not put us in the middle. And it made us able to have a close relationship with each of our parents. And they each married, so I had step-parents as well. Then, when I got married, my ex-husband was married before, and he had 3 children with his first wife. So I was able to use everything that my mom and dad taught me about getting along in my own marriage. I co-parented with their mother. The children lived with us. I raised my stepchildren. And that is important. So the lessons I learned, I was then able to use. But if kids see hate and anger, they're going to continue with hate and anger.
And just from a legal point of view, and I agree with that, and in terms of the process, one party will try to evaporate that part of the storm and make suggestions through the legal process by motion for either a social investigation, so that parent, the better parent, so to speak, has more timeshare, able to dedicate more time, or raise the level to either a parenting coordinator, and then the next level would be to a guardian ad litem. Unfortunately for litigants, all these steps become very, very expensive.
Yes.
Because not only are you paying a lawyer, you're paying that third party, a social investigator, a parenting coordinator, or guardian ad litem to come into the case, and one party may believe the other party is paying it, and unless you're very wealthy, at the end of the day, the judge looks at all those expenses, and it's not just the one party that pays it. It comes out of the marital pot.
Right. A lot of times the spouse will say, oh, my spouse is not capable. He's not a good father, or he's not a good mother. And they demand that they have all of these evaluations, and sometimes the evaluations come back and the spouse is perfectly normal. That looks very bad in court.
Exactly, and just by example, I just thought of it. I had a case that was a very lengthy trial. Primarily, most of the case had to do with finances, and my client had a lot of real estate holdings. And unfortunately, we all know what happened in 2007 and 8 with the real estate market, and his holdings decreased substantially. And as part of the divorce process, for the wife to try to get an upper hand, my client was a great father. He was the lacrosse coach, not only of his son's team, but other teams with his daughters. And one time, my client did get angry, and he did hit his son with the lacrosse stick on the field, on the tush, backside, and that became an issue in front of the judge. And the client spent a lot of money discussing the issue and trying to make my client look bad in front of the judge. And this judge, very old school, maybe only in her mid-50s, but very old school, said, you know what, she grew up in a household where, you know what, sometimes the parents gave you a little whack on the backside. That doesn't make you a bad parent. And that has to do with some latitude in parenting skills or motivation. However, something like that should have never come to court to try to make the other parent look bad to the judge.
And it costs a lot of money, and now the judge looks badly on the spouse that's causing all this investigation.
And it backfired on this woman that made the accusation, because a lot of testimony and witnesses that came in by the wife to say that this event took place were saying that my client was a great father who, rain or shine, was always there coaching, always willing to facilitate, and really, really a positive factor, not only for his own child or children on the team, but for the other parents as well, helping them.
So, just so you know, what he's talking about is an extreme case, but they happen all the time. And not only was it costly, and not only did it look badly on the wife who is accusing the husband of all of these things that were really not terrible, but the children are in the middle of all of this, and they are very well aware, because you mentioned a couple of different things which I'd like to explain to the audience. The first thing you said was a social investigation. Sometimes the spouse is accused of being negligent or abusive, and one spouse demands a social investigation. Everyone gets evaluated, not just the spouse that's accused. The spouse that's accused gets evaluated. The spouse that's making the accused gets evaluated. Everyone in the immediate family gets interviewed. All the children get interviewed. Not only do sometimes in-laws and siblings, they bring in experts who have been around the family, and they evaluate what really is going on. And this is costly. It could cost anywhere up to $20,000. The next thing you mentioned was a parenting coordinator. A parenting coordinator speaks to mom and says, Dad wants to pick up Friday at 4 o'clock, and then he checks with mom, is that what you want? Yes. Then calls Dad and says, okay, Dad, Mom said 4 o'clock is okay. This is expensive. These are for couples who cannot even communicate through text messages to each other. Finally, we talked about a guardian ad litem. A guardian ad litem is an attorney for the child, and that is a separate fee. and the guardian ad litem is going to do what's in the best interest of the children. The more you accuse your spouse of not being a good parent, the more aggravation it causes everybody.
And sometimes some litigants ask, can my child testify?
Great topic.
And when I'm presented with that question by my client, you need to then explain to the client the Pandora's box that they're opening up. And without going into that specific, what is very distressful to me, because I really care about what I do and trying to help people, is that I then, in my mind, I focus on the child. What effect is that going to have on the child? No child wants to be called out of school. They're teenagers. They're 14, 15 years old, and there's a requirement that they have to be A students, and I'm not going to go into the factors right now, but really focusing on the parenting issue. Why a parent would want to cause that heartache and stress upon an A student or any student to come out of school to testify in chambers with a judge and tell the story about what goes on between mom and dad. And although they think, that parent asking for it thinks that it's going to help their case, inevitably, from my experience, it has backfired almost 100%, because as one child at 15 will probably then figure this all out, maybe when they're 25 or 35.
That's right.
As to what happened back then, and they're going to say to themselves, wow, my mother, my father, they didn't do me a favor here.
Nope.
And it's a lot of psychological effect. And then, just shifting a little bit, is the parents don't realize, as part of that, there's children that are really crying out by their behavior that they want to see a therapist. A lot of times children in their teen years, maybe 10, 11, 12, 13, can't say or think that it's socially acceptable to see a therapist, but they're doing certain things, and the parents then have to say, I need to take my child to a therapist independent. And that's expensive. Most therapists I know are between $150 and $200 an hour. So if you're doing that 4 times a month, you're north of $400 a month as an added expense, which most people going through a divorce are very tight on money, because you have 2 households to support if one party moves out. So the Pandora box that opens with these parenting, the lack of parenting skills, is something that we can't even enumerate, because every time you turn a corner, there's some other expense and there's some other psychological event that takes place that's not evident maybe today, tomorrow, or next year, but it does open up.
We're just scratching the surface when it comes to parenting. Stay tuned for future episodes where we'll go into each topic individually. You can find Lou Shafer in Boca Raton. You can find him on our website at divorceconnectionnetwork.com. Thanks for watching. Thanks for coming.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye now.